Thank you all very much. Tell me a place in New York where you can find a more interesting group of people. Delighted to have you all here. So it is my pleasure to introduce Ashok Panikkar, our speaker this morning. He's a conflict resolution professional with extensive international experience in India, South Asia, the United States, Europe, and the Middle East. He is the founder of whatever you didn't found, he did. Many not-for-profits, many projects, many programs, many spending grant people's money. He gets an idea, and then all of a sudden it's a thing, it's not an idea anymore. One of the not-for-profits is called Mediator, still headquartered in Bangalore?
Let's just say it's on the cloud right now.
Okay, and I'll give Ashok an opportunity to explain that more, but many other organizations as well. He specializes in communities and organizations communicating and working together. So I had the chance to ask him what in his personality brought him to that. I asked him that question on a bad phone line, and I thought what he said was, "I'm a mystic." And I said, this is going to be interesting. And the more he spoke, I said, "Did you say you're a mystic?" And he said, no. I have known since I was 6 years old that I am a misfit. And if you think about that, what he did was, as he grew, he learned how to place himself, work and play well with others, and came to realize eventually, after other kinds of careers he could tell you about if it's important, he decided, this is a thing that people can learn and I can teach. So that's how he got into his work. Interestingly to me, Elaine Nissen and I have actually done a couple of times programs on humor in mediation. Ashok runs workshops on them, and it's interesting to me that the title of his workshops is humor a creative tool or an indulgence? It really made me think. It's a very interesting way to put it. I'm going to skip a couple of other things, and let's just get going with Ashok. I'll turn the microphone over to him. We will be breaking at about 9:30, very briefly, for people to sneak out. Ashok.
Thank you, Chuck. Please tell me if this is wandering too far away from my mouth. Anyway, but thank you so much, Maria and Chuck, for inviting me. It's always difficult to know how to start with a group. And one of the things I've discovered over a period of time is that the best way to start is put the onus on the group. So I'm going to ask you a question. My question is, how many of you, actually I have a couple of questions. My first question is, how many of you have done mediation given the topic, in autocratic societies? And it could be communities that are autocratic. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, somebody at the back. Great. My next question is a little closer to home. How many of you did not vote for Trump? Did not vote for Trump? Because I don't want to embarrass those who voted. So how many of you did not? Keep your hands up. I want to see. Thank you. Now I want to go back into history. Now, I want to go back into history. By that I mean 10, 15 years ago. How many of you did not vote for George Bush? Did not vote. Good. Okay, so one of the things that strikes me when I work with groups like this, groups of mediators, very educated, very urbanized, is that most of us, our values tend to be fairly similar. Talking of echo chambers, talking of bubbles, I have discovered that most mediators, even if there's tremendous diversity within the group, essentially the broader values tend to be fairly similar. 2010, I was giving a talk at UCLA, again for mediators, and I asked the question about George Bush. And only one person had voted for him in a group of about 120 people. So this should tell us something. I mean, so many people are today in the US astounded that there are large numbers of people who voted for Trump. And even very senior mediators I know are astounded that this could happen. We must really be living in a really isolated bubble, because there are large numbers of people, and the idea that all of them are bigots, the idea that all of them are xenophobes, is actually somewhat offensive to human beings, that large sections of humanity can be written off that way. See, it does seem problematic to me. So one of the things that I'd like to talk about today, and I'd like to talk with you about this, is if we as mediators are very clear in a way about our value system. We may disagree on some specifics, like transgender bathrooms, for instance. But in general, our value system is fairly clear. If that's the case, is there a certain value system that comes with mediation itself? What are the values that you think we mediators bring into a room, whether we are mediating or whether we are, whether it's a social environment or a group conversation or whatever else? What are these values that are intrinsic or seem intrinsic to mediation? So I'd just like to open up right now. Anybody? What do you think the key values of mediation are? And I'm not talking of process. So I don't want you to tell me about neutrality or confidentiality. That's a process thing. But the underlying moral values or ethical values of mediation itself, what are those? Thoughts? I'll pass it around.
Respect for the person and the person's ability to decide.
Okay, great. Respect for the person and the person's ability to decide. Okay. Okay, great, thank you.
An open mind.
An open mind. Okay, thank you.
The importance of listening and allowing space for people to be heard.
Can I suggest that that's something that we do, but what's the value underlying that?
The importance of what people have to say and the importance of having them be heard.
Excellent. The importance of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Humility.
Humility. Great. Thank you.
Sorry, I just want to kind of going off that everyone has an opinion and should be heard. And that opinion should be heard.
Everyone should be heard. Great. Excellent.
Truth.
The idea of truth. Interesting. You're getting us into uncharted waters here. Yes.
Faith in the idea that all conflict can be resolved non-violently.
Wow, that's one heck of a faith. Okay.
Okay, I have an issue here because my son is a Trump supporter.
Okay.
And so if you say these values that they're talking about, I think if I would talk to him, he would say, I'm open-minded. I'm for truth.
Yeah.
So it's like you're saying all these values, but he would say, what are you talking about?
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for that perspective.
I thought that's a great segue. Thank you for a little provocation from this side. Is
Please.
That even you say don't look at process or confidentiality, but I'm looking at it altogether. Mediation actually is very individualistic. And whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not saying. That's just how it is. But of course, by being so individualistic, people don't see that. When I mediate in Africa, I don't do one-on-one mediations because I destroy the community. What is confidentiality here is secrecy there. You don't do that to the group that you go on 2 by 2 and make your deal and think you can do that without everybody. You go to the circle. So there's that individualistic versus community, and that's actually the difference between liberals and Republicans. Is some fight on their values, like we're a group, and our values are also how we behave towards the outside. And the others have more of, they're not thinking so much of the other, but they look at what is their internal value. So they're actually a little bit apples and oranges, and that's why everybody said we have the same values. But the emphasis of where we use them is in Republican values today is more like, oh, the others and vis-a-vis the others, and we're all together. And together is so important that we actually also, give up some things for it. Whereas the liberals are always infighting because they're looking inside, how we treat each other. So I think it isn't as simple as, some are good and some are not. I think it's community versus individualistic.
Thank you very much. Just so we are all clear, I'm not suggesting something is good and something is bad. I'm just trying to understand the values, and you raise a very important point about collective versus individual and confidentiality versus private or secret. Thank you.
I'm also going to use the opportunity to problematize.
Please.
If the society itself holds certain values, in America, there's like it's like a very racist society, generally speaking.
Sorry, what kind of society?
In America, like we're a pretty racist society. It's hard for individuals to separate themselves from those ideologies and like learnings, even if they're sort of consciously trying to do that in the context of a mediation.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Is there anybody else? No. Good. Thank you so much. So I'm going to start with a couple of anecdotes. Anecdotes because I haven't done a scientific study on this. The first time I ran a mediation course in India, this was in 2005. And just so you know, in 2005, there was no mediation at all in the country. The court-ordered mediation started in a couple of states in 2008. I'm good, thank you. 2007 or 2008, and that too only in a few states. 2005 and 2006, I ran a couple of mediation training programs, your standard 40-hour programs. And it was really, really interesting to watch the cleavage in the group. The more urbanized, secularized folks absolutely took to it. They loved it. They thought, this is so empowering that I can actually sit with someone who I have a dispute with, and by using certain tools and by being open in a certain way, I can actually find common ground. The more conservative members of the group started finding it problematic. They found it problematic because the idea that a mediator should not give advice or solve the problem was anathema to them. There was one woman who was, I would say, profile mid-40s to early 50s, Muslim woman, Indian Muslim woman, very affluent, very, very well-educated. She was a professional woman. She ran a hotel, meaning her family ran a hotel, and she was very active in that. She was really upset with the idea that the mediator should remain somewhat detached from the problem-solving process. And her stance was, look, many people in a conflict have no idea what's good for them, particularly if they are younger. And I, as an adult and as a respectable member of my society, I know what they should do. I'm all for framing things well, I'm all for listening, but at the end of the day, I have a responsibility to tell people what's good for them and to ensure that they do it. So I'm just giving you one example, okay? I did another one, just in case anybody thinks this is a Muslim issue, it isn't. This was a elderly Christian lady from the south of India, who was a medical doctor. She was a retired physician. And her son, who was 33 years old, who was a techie, half of India are techies. I can barely switch on my computer. He had gone through a divorce and he was staying at home. It was like the Lebanese civil war, mother and son. And what did it boil down to? She blamed him for the divorce. It was an arranged marriage, and the marriage collapsed. She blamed him for the divorce, thought he was not a good Christian because he was starting to explore Buddhism and Hinduism in a very gentle way. But for her, it was absolutely unthinkable because this is a family that was really, it was Syrian Christian, okay? And for them, Christianity was very, very important. And the idea that her son would be even open to the idea that there could be any other God or another way of worship or belief, another system of belief, was absolutely terrifying for her. And the two of them were at each other. The only reason why she came for mediation was because I knew her nephew? I forget. No. I knew her brother who was much younger to her. And he said, look, why don't you at least try this? So from day one when she came, and I did the spiel, this is what I will do as a mediator. My job is not to advise or to solve your problems, was to get the whole spiel. She listened very carefully, nodded to everything I said, and at the end of every session told me, please teach him how to behave as a Christian and as a son. It didn't matter what I said. Unlike the Muslim lady, she never challenged me. But it didn't get in. That was not what mediation was. Now, the reason why I give this is and thank you for saying that about individualistic societies. I think many of us take for granted that the individual is supreme. That fundamentally, human dignity stems from and is really all about individual autonomy and the way individuals are treated or respected or disrespected, as the case may be. Most autocratic societies, not all, tend to be collectivist. And I grew up in India, but it's only in the last 12 years when I worked there as a mediator, particularly after 10 years in the US, when I went back in 2005, that I realized how fundamentally different these societies were to anything quote-unquote Western. Call it Judeo-Christian, call it post-Reformation, post-Enlightenment, post-Industrial Revolution, post-Civil Rights, post-World War I, World War II, whatever the social political movements that have shaped the West. The East or the South, as you call it, and this is broad brush statements. Forgive me, you can always find exceptions, but I'm not interested in nitpicking on that because I think at one level, even though I used to I did diversity training for 10 years, so I know everything about stereotypes, but I insist on making stereotypes for the simple reason that we need to recognize patterns. Human beings, beyond anything else, are also pattern-making creatures. And there are patterns, if we don't recognize, we will be doing a serious disservice to critical thinking. Now, these societies inherently respect what some might call Republican values, but seriously, even the Republican values are much softer than what many feudalistic values are. They respect the collective rather than the individual. They respect obedience and loyalty to critical thinking. They respect tradition to innovation, acceptance to questioning. And I don't mean this as a horrible thing. I have personal preferences. I don't want to live in Saudi Arabia. There are many parts of India I don't want to live in. I would find it terribly offensive. But that's a personal preference. The fundamental thing is we as mediators, and again, I'm sure there are Republican mediators. They could be like the lady I trained in 2005, very Islamist mediators. But in general, not just mediators, but the value system that comes with the field itself. And if we look at the origins of the field, I think it becomes apparent that there is a substrata of values out of which it grew. And we need to recognize that, particularly if we want to work across cultural divides. And it's not just whether you want to work in India or Africa or Middle East, even within the US. We assume that the values that we have, apart from those being the most beautiful values, we assume that others share them. They don't. I can assure you, and okay, let me just take a step back. Over 12 years in India, I'm not kidding, I have had about 50 expatriate mediators and conflict resolutioners work with me in Bangalore. You'd be surprised how many Americans want to come and work with Metaculture, which is the name of my, one of my many non-profits. Okay, but Metaculture was the name of my organization. And I have seen, like I said, almost tens of people with master's degrees in conflict resolution pass through my offices, from internships to full-time employment. And some of them have stayed there for 5 years, others have stayed there for 3 months or 6 months. And I can tell you, my values are not the same as most of them. Ostensibly, they are. We talk the same language. We are all for fairness. We are all for individual decision-making. We are all for, what are some of the wonderful things? Yes, giving power to the participant. We are all for respect. If you just take each of these terms, and if you just dig into it, that's a Pandora's box. The word respect, which is bandied around so easily, particularly when you want to trash someone else, you know, it is absolutely unimaginable how much, what a universe exists. A universe of extremely contradictory, complex ideas that are beating around inside that little word. We started something more than 2 years ago in India. Not mediation, which we kind of gave up after a while on. We started something called Socrates' Last Stand. Last stand. Just before the hemlock. Okay? Which kind of gives you an idea of what my mental state was after 9 years in India. And here's what we did. Because I realized that, one, India was sliding away from democracy. People were becoming more and more open to the idea of a strong leader who would brook no nonsense and who'd clean up the mess. We wanted trains to run on time. We wanted corrupt politicians to be killed. We wanted everybody to forcibly respect everybody else. Okay? And all good things. But we were becoming less tolerant of anybody who didn't think exactly like us. Okay? 3 years ago, India got its first really nationalist, right-wing Hindu government. It's absolutely terrifying. Now, here's the thing. We decided to start Socrates' Last Stand because I got very frustrated with the fact that all my career, and I've had a couple of them, I was dependent on clients or grant makers to do my work. In other words, if nobody paid me, I was totally irrelevant. This felt problematic. Am I just practicing a trade as a mediator or a dialogue facilitator, and I would put on my hat and do my great work to save the world as long as you paid me for it? In which case, how am I different from a dentist or a carpenter or what do you call them in casinos? Croupier, right? How am I different from any of them, or a mafia hitman? A mafia hitman doesn't do it for love or God or to improve society. He does it because there's somebody paying him. I say this, and I'm being partly facetious, but I need you to understand this. Almost every mediator I know is infused with wanting to bring about peace and justice. But we are all restricting ourselves to doing it only as professionals. If I don't get the tenure track, I won't teach. If I don't get 20,000 or 200,000 grant, I won't do this critical work in the community because I can't. I was becoming very frustrated with this model. So one of the things, and Stacy was with us for the last 1 year, she knows we developed our own projects. And there was no money. And we would go into the communities and put out an announcement and say, this is what we are doing. And Socrates' Last Stand was a program we did in cafes, in academic institutions, and we just put out notices. Social media is great for this. And we said, today we are going to discuss about freedom or democracy or integrity. And this is going to be a different kind of conversation. If you're interested, come. People came, sometimes as little as 15, sometimes 35 to 45 people came for 2.5 hours and sat there, and it was the first experience they had of a genuinely well-designed, well-facilitated, even if I say so myself, dialogue. And it was an experience in critical thinking, because my job as a facilitator was to get people to really think twice about these terms. So when we talk about integrity, we designed the session so that people would really dig into the term, understand the term from multiple perspectives. And we had a group of 20 to 30 people, each one having a very different idea about respect or integrity. It was fantastic, and they didn't have to fight with each other because that's why it's being facilitated. And it was completely frank. I put a premium, even when I work with, I've done a lot of work with Hindus and Muslims. We don't focus on this is something very similar between Trump and me. I hate political correctness. And my dialogues, you can say what you want. But my job as a facilitator is to take that and leverage it for greater conversation. So there's nothing you cannot say in my dialogues or in my mediation. And this came out of the work that I did on race in Boston in the late 90s. I realized that most of my colleagues they're walking on eggshells, unable to talk about what was really important. And so at the end of it, we all came out thinking we like being with each other, we can hug and walk out. And in the process, very little changed. So my stance towards this is to get into the deeper values where more often than not we do not agree. Use that to construct commonalities. I don't start from commonalities. Now, I don't want you to think that that's what I always do, depending on the group. Sometimes I have to start with commonalities. But in general, I mean, why would anybody come to me if not for the differences? Let's be clear. I'm bringing people together because they genuinely disagree with each other, or in some cases, they're ready to kill each other. And then the best I can do is bring the dirt up to the surface and not clean it or whitewash it, but dig into the dirt to understand what's really happening there. And in the process, I don't have to try. The commonalities become self-evident. And I'm not kidding. I've had we did a multi-year program with Hindus and Muslims. These were groups, some of those groups were even banned groups. Sorry, they used to be banned, but were unbanned at certain points in time. I made it very clear I wanted only very strong believers. So I didn't want wishy-washy secularists in the group. Because there's no point. Why do I need people who say, oh, there's no problem, we're all brothers and sisters. Give it a break. Go somewhere else. Go have a beer. But if you're here, I want people who genuinely believe that the Muslim way is better or the Hindu way is better. And I brought them together. Most of these people had never talked to the other group. I mean, there were groups like Jamaat-e-Islamiyah, which is an outshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood that Trump once banned. It's the most powerful Muslim cultural organization in India. The RSS, Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, which was a banned outfit. They're the ones who were responsible for killing Gandhi. So we brought people like that. And guess what? They were extremely polite with each other the first 2 sessions. At one point, I yelled at them. Oh, I'm that kind of a facilitator, by the way. Okay? I yelled at them and I said, yeah, totally. If you want to be polite, don't waste my time. I said, don't waste my time. I have so many other things I can do. If you want to be honest, I'm your man. It took me still about 3 sessions to get them to genuinely feel safe, to say where they were really coming from. By the 5th session, and this went on for 2 years, by the 5th session, they were saying the kind of things that would set off a violent riot on the streets. But after they said it, when they went for tea, they would hug each other and go for tea. And it was completely honest. Completely honest. And I became extremely conscious of something, and this has informed a lot of the work I do with democracy now. The values of democracy are so specific and so unusual. It's like a historic oddity. We just assume, like the fish in the water, thinking that the water is, the environment. Yeah, like what is there about the water? It's what everybody wants. No. The values of democracy come from a particular cultural, political, social environment because of certain historic reasons. And guess what? Most of the world doesn't believe in it or don't believe in it. And here's I'm not a political scientist, but I'm terrified about the way politics is shaping up globally. And here's my hypothesis. If the West gives up its commitment to democracy internally in North America or Europe, the rest of the world will happily jettison this ridiculous system. The only reason why by that I mean people like my country, or I would say anywhere in the Middle East, anywhere in Asia, anywhere in Africa, why we are still democratic is because otherwise, and I use this half-kiddingly, Big Brother will haul us up in the Security Council or will withdraw aid or impose sanctions on us. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. Inherently, these values are alien to us. Now, how do you change this? For me, as I said, it's personal preference. I'm deeply committed to secular, liberal values. And I think democracy is the most humane, powerful system of self-governance. Self-governance. But it's a personal preference. There are many people in many parts of the world who think otherwise. And I don't believe I have any right to tell them otherwise. Not for any other reason, because you can't export democracy. You can't export it. America has tried for many, many years. And I don't mean just Iraq or Afghanistan. Even softer export of democracy is difficult. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the dialogue for a moment.
Please,
Oh,
please.
thank you.
Okay.
I'd like
Sorry, thank you. Stop me at any time. I ramble. So just get me back on focus.
Yeah, so wasn't rambling, but I'm interested in something you said. I don't want
Please.
to miss the nuance. So I do a lot of dialogue work, and so what you just did or said was antithetical to the way I've practiced. So I need to understand it better, and we make clear the difference between dialogue, debate, and discussion.
Absolutely.
So I value anything that will get to honesty. I think there are different ways to be honest, and people have different goals. If they're there to humiliate someone else, I think it's much harder for the other to hear them and get to the truth. So I'd like you to say a little more about political correctness versus norms of respect. I know that's a complex word, but norms, I'll say.
Great.
And if you encourage any guideline setting at all.
Thank you. Oh my God, I'm a fascist in the dialogue room. I have so many rules there, but my rules are designed in order to help you be honest. It's not what you cannot say. There is no such thing as what you cannot say. But I have rules. You will only speak one at a time. And if you know Asians and Middle Eastern, we are talking all the time at each other, and we can have 3 conversations at the same time with 2 people. You know? So there's a huge cultural shift that I'm demanding of my participants. And I do that even in the US. You have to hold your horses. If you are desperately trying to say something, I encourage them to write it down. So this is one norm, which is a non-negotiable. The second is, you will not, and let me talk of the more egregious behavior that I don't allow. You will not physically assault anyone. You will not threaten to physically assault anyone. But, sorry? Yes, we are in agreement. And hold on to that agreement. It might take a while for the next one to come. Thou shalt genuinely try, with my help, to understand the other. This is very important. Most people have difficulty understanding anything that their mind tells them is problematic. And one of the reasons why I seriously distrust political correctness is because of critical thinking. If you and I disagree, and I don't want to hurt you, or I want others to think I'm a nice person, if I hear something problematic from you, either because it's not so important or I really don't care about you or what you think, I will smile and say, I understand. You can't get away with a statement, I understand in my, I'll come to you. You can't get away with that because I will ask you to clarify and explain to the other person what it is you understand and how you understand it. And in the process, if there are lapses in logic, in the other person's logic, I will ask you, so are you sure you understand that? Because it sounds as though what that person said doesn't square with your experience of it. How does that sit with you? I am a very active facilitator because I'm trying to ensure that the reasoning is sound. So understanding requires that in your conceptual framework, something sits without dissonance. Or if there's dissonance, that it's made explicit. So I'll come back to it, but you have a thought.
Yeah, I know not a comment, or the larger question here seems to me is how much are we able to let it rip in a way that leads to catharsis versus all-out war? Because there's something to be said for suppressing your instincts when it means not killing somebody, right? But the line almost is that sometimes mediators are so afraid or not trained that they suppress the confusion according to their own comfortableness, right? And you can guess that I'm on the side of letting it rip, but my colleagues are close to expelling me, and so that's not a comfort zone. But I don't know. I do this, and this is where the question comes in, not the comment. I'm truly interested in how can that be teachable, repeatable, learnable. How much can every individual, how far can and should every individual go where they keep themselves and the group or whoever is there under their facilitation safe? and where does it become counterproductive, and how do we learn that, and how and my sense is probably we can't learn that without doing deep inner work. And just as a final thing, because I have friends who actually very seriously say the reason why Trump was elected was because of all the political correctness for years. It wasn't thrashed out. So it was festering, and everybody was so politically correct that they couldn't say anything. So that's how all the other opinions and diversity got missed. Right? So it's actually not a helpful thing. So when is it help and when is it hindrance? And how can it be analyzed and taught?
Thank you. So this is linked with it, so I can just continue. So here's my thought on this. I'll pick up on your question. Can this be taught? Perhaps. But before it can be taught, there's a minor thing called character. And this is something that people don't want to think about very often. But you can have all the tools, all the techniques, but if deep down you don't have, for instance, courage, you will shrivel up the moment you think the conversation is going out of your control. Courage is fundamental if you want to do this work. And unfortunately, that's not talked about as much in your 40-hour training programs, or definitely not in your 2-year master's degrees. Courage, it's a simple thing. But what is courage? It means and it took me many years to figure this out. When I'm in front of a client or in front of a group, I'll be honest with you, and people like Stacy know this, I don't care if they get pissed off with me. I don't care if I lose the account, and I don't care if they never call me again. When I'm there, the only thing I'm bothered about is my own sense of integrity and my commitment to doing the best job possible, whether they like it or not. Sorry? Aren't you being like Muslim woman? Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's the thing. That's why character is very important. In other words, when I say, and this is where things get complex. When I say whether they like it or not, I'm not saying I will do anything to harm them, but I will listen to them. If they want me, for instance, to do something which I think is inherently problematic, and I'm not talking as much of mediation as of dialogue. I want to make this distinction. Mediation, I'm a little more structured. But dialogue, it's like, and here's another reason. Mediation very often is local, specific, interpersonal. Dialogue, I'm dealing with groups that might actually go out and riot. The stakes are extraordinarily high. And in that situation, I have to be very clear that my job there is not as a cop, is not to prevent violence. I'm not into violence prevention. I am into bringing about serious shifts in the way they see themselves, the way they see the other person, and the way in which they engage with each other. I'm not for band-aid solutions. So I'll give you an example. After 6 to 8 months, there was you'll love this. The month of Ramzan, fasting. So our sessions were on Saturdays. And on Saturday, while the group was, I can see Chuck is getting nervous. No? No, okay. So, a Saturday, we have, incidentally, not only is it multi-year programs, it's a full day of rigorous dialogue. I don't do these 2-hour thing unless it's in a pub or a bar and it's with beer. Okay? It's really grueling. But we make it fun. That's another matter. But Saturday, month of Ramzan, the Hindus, out of respect to the Muslims, said, Ashok, forget lunch because the Muslims don't eat. Okay? And it would be difficult for them if we served lunch. I said, no, you will serve lunch. I said, you will serve lunch. And guess what? The Hindus were, but we are trying to get along. I said, yes, you are getting along with difference, not by brushing the difference under the table. Okay? And the Muslims were shocked because their idea of dialogue is kissy kissy. I said, no. I want you to recognize that when you get out of this room, it's going to be very difficult for you to deal with the Brahmin who finds your ways offensive. The Hindu who says you're unclean because your family eats beef. How are you going to deal with that? So, and then guess what? At the end of it, the Muslims actually came and said, Ashok, thank you. We would have actually done the easy thing and agreed. But this allowed us to manage our own feelings when we couldn't eat. But we saw the Hindus tucking into all that great food. And the Hindus were very, very respectful of the Muslims while lunch was going on. And some of them kept apologizing, I hope you don't mind. You know, and these are people, I'm not kidding, these are people who are ultra, not just orthodox. They're almost militant. They're almost militant. Their people kill each other. Okay? But this became a teachable moment. And I'm just giving this as an example. Part of what you need, I'll come back to character. It's not just courage, it's the ability to take risks. You cannot bring any kind of shift. I'll come to you. You cannot create any kind of shift if you are scared of taking risks. Let's face it, the Hindu-Muslim conflict is 1,000 years. And you want to play nice with the two of them and expect results? It ain't happening. Really? Yes, sir. Yeah.
It's about 9:30. If everyone could anyone who needs to leave, this would be a good time to sneak in.
I won't take it personally. Go for it.
So I've primarily done mediations in the landlord-tenant context, and like the different so the Muslim Hindu, like let's say there was a housing mediation where between a Muslim and a Hindu in India, and like it's as a mediator, it's like clear to you that like that there are power dynamics associated with their relationship that are impacting their landlord-tenant relationship. Is there a way to design the mediation? And I'm thinking specifically in the American context, so that wouldn't be that precise example, but in any case, is there a way to design the mediation to account for those differences, to make sure that everyone's dignity is being honored in that interpersonal, like, economic example?
Great point, and the reason why I appreciate your question is because I cut my teeth in landlord-tenant mediation in Boston. Okay? That's where I started my career as a conflict resolution professional. And while I never did any Hindu-Muslim landlord-tenant, I did black and white. I did gay and conservative straight. I did corporation, these large housing companies, and almost homeless, extremely vulnerable tenant. And power is always an issue. But it's not just there. You take you and your spouse. Huge power issues. And it's not always, and this is something that a lot of people don't like it when I say this. You can't be simplistic about power, thinking that it's a white man always at the top and everybody else in a hierarchy now. Sometimes, if those of you who have young children, your 3-year-old has way more power than you have, particularly in a public space. Power, the way when I do consensus building, which is complex multi-stakeholder work, governments, environmental groups, corporations, etc., we define stakeholders as not just anybody who has something to do with the issue, anybody who has the capacity or potential to be a nuisance. A nuisance. In other words, if you look at a stakeholder as anybody who can create trouble, there is nobody in a conflict, no matter how little power they have, who cannot leverage their nuisance value. So I'm always sensitive to power, but not in a political way, thinking the white man is at the top of all the problems on the planet and the rest of us are victims. I don't do that. But I do design it. And again, I'll be honest with you. It's actually not so complicated. If both of them, let's just say one is here power-wise, the other one is here, if they trust that you are being fair, utterly, totally, devastatingly fair, you will have a great conversation. If they feel that even if this person feels that you are supporting this person, your mediation is short. Your dialogue is short. So I am ruthless in my own fairness. and I make everybody miserable. And they equally hate me, and we have great conversations. Because I don't want to be liked. I really don't want to be liked. And it took me a long time, but I don't even want to be called back and given another project and the money that comes with it. I have to tell you, I'm not, this is not false bravado, or bravado, as the Americans say. I have found, it took me many years, I have found that not worrying about my next project is extremely liberating. Because I can do the best job you've called me for. Like here. I would love it if you folk liked what I was saying and got value out of it. But if you never invite me, that's okay. That's okay. Because I don't do this work for any other reason but the fact that I think the world is in a mess. It's not a trade for me. Mediation is not a trade. I've had other careers. I chose mediation and dialogue because I think the world needs it. And then if I become like a dentist or a carpenter or a sales or a realtor with the same value system, how am I different? How am I going to create a world where I'm following the same rules of professionalism and materialism and greed and everything else? I am no different. Absolutely, copywriting yoga. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
So you answered the question about the money. So, I mean, you do get paid, but whether you come back or not come back is not an issue. The other thing is, how do you get people to come to the table? Because let's say I have my son, and I don't think, like, if he doesn't want to talk to me, he doesn't want to talk to me, you know. So, I mean, you're lucky that people want to talk.
Oh, you have no idea. You have no idea. Okay, but this is a great question, and I'll put it this way. When we decided to convene the Hindu-Muslim dialogues, it took us 1 year to get the people to the table. One of my colleagues, Raghav, a young man with a master's in international relations, he worked the whole year going and visiting the hardcore militant groups. And they were aggressive. They told him, they accused Metaculture of being CIA agents and of being part of the intelligence network. And they said, what's your business with this? Who is paying you for this? We said, we have no money. But it doesn't matter. We think it's important. It took us a year to get them to the table. But I'll say something else. Yeah, I'll come to you.
I'm sorry, I have to leave, but I wanted to ask you a quick question.
Yes, please.
A difficult question. How do you bring the dirt to the surface? Can you give an example how you bring the dirt to the surface?
Okay. Firstly, that's not a quick answer. Let me put it this way. Okay, I'm not trying to pitch a plug for my programs. I'm not. But we've developed a methodology called meta-dialogue, which actually takes the normal, what I call the public conversations project model, and takes it literally to the edge. And we use humor as a very important tool, and irreverence. We are seriously irreverent. Okay, and I'll be honest with you. You know, I mean, I keep saying that term, but I don't know why I do that. But after 6 to 8 months, with the Hindu-Muslim group, with the Muslim group, I could crack jokes about Muhammad, and they would laugh with me. Because they want to do it. It's just that everybody else is so scared. And they thrive on making you scared about talking about anything honestly. Okay, I make jokes about the burqa with them. And guess what? They come to my house for lunches and dinners. Stacey's attended a few of them. The hardcore Muslim groups are such close friends. I'm working on another project without the Hindus, with the Muslims. But here's how, okay, here's my, again, completely unscientific assumption. People really, deep down, want to be honest. Most people don't like leading fraudulent, completely insulated lives. Yeah, people want to be who they are. Like the gay person who is afraid of coming out of the closet, they don't want to stay in the closet. Most people would like to tell you what they really think, but they know there are consequences. So if you actually get people to share this, the so-called dirt will come, and you'll realize it's really not dirt. So she's leaving, but last thought, ma'am, it's not dirt. So can I just, you had your hand up. Yeah.
With the same, I'm
Please.
still wondering about this. When you have courage to let the dialogue roll, and you said that power, even more.
Yes.
You said everybody has power, and being disruptive is an act of power. When that you are able to create the dialogue by people trusting you. When you lose the trust, just because of the flow of whatever, or I should say, I'm trying to find this edge of, when do you stop and stop letting the conversation tip over and crash? Another way of saying this is, we see many times in a dispute where it's often the underdog is overtalked, and they leave because they've been overtalked. And when they come back into the arena, they have a knife, a gun, and things happen very quickly. What do? You can recognize that they've been overtalked, and you can hopefully stop it before that time. But after they've left the room, or I should say, what do you do at the edge?
Got it. Thank you. So here's something. I said courage, and I said risk-taking. I didn't talk about something else, which is fundamental. You need extraordinary skill. I cannot minimize the importance. You cannot learn dialogue facilitation in an academic course. You can read all the textbooks, all the popular books on dialogue, and from Deborah Tannen to anybody else, Ken Cloak. It ain't gonna help. You need phenomenal practice. And it's practice that develops skill, not reading and not attending workshops. This talk is not going to improve your skill by an iota. The problem with our model of learning is we assume that workshops and academic programs or books transfer skill. No, skill. See, and the reason why I appreciate this is my first career was as a graphic designer, where in the days before computers, I did everything with my hands. I drew, I illustrated, I painted. I learned the importance of craftsmanship. For some of you, it would be craftwomanship, but the concept is the same. You have to be extraordinarily good at what you do. It's not through cognitive, intellectual knowledge that you become good at something. You might memorize a lot of things. You might even understand it analytically. But once you sit down and do something, you need craft. So courage, risk-taking capabilities, and craft. And craft requires practice. It's only with practice. And I'll put something else. This is unfashionable in the Western context, where we believe an individual has control over her learning. Ain't so. You need teachers. This is the biggest fallacy with that, and you can get me really started on this, the fraud of online and e-learning. It makes do without teachers. There is a reason why you have teachers. The professors here who are graying bring with them decades of experience, which if you can't tap into it and you're focused on the text that they have written, you're completely missing out on it. In the old days, they called this something which is unfashionable now, wisdom. Very important. In other words, without a guide or a mentor or a teacher, you cannot even improve your craft. You need someone to give you on the spot, absolutely ruthless feedback. If you are resistant to the feedback, if you're defensive, and therefore you give the professor a poor grade because she's pissed you off, you are not going to learn. You might get an A because the professor is terrified about the student evaluation, but you ain't going to be worth nothing. There are no shortcuts to life or in being a good facilitator or a mediator. At this point, I am a conservative. This is one issue where my thinking is like the old gurus or the old teachers who were taskmasters. There's no getting away. So I would say this. You have to know how to smell a room. You have to know, and that only, you're not intuitively born with it. You develop it over years. And you get to a stage where, if I'm talking to you, I can actually smell what's happening there. And then, right as soon as you finish, I move here and I pay attention here. Here's something else. I know it sounds Zen-like, but, and I'm not mystical. Chuck, I'm not mystical. But you have to be 100% present, which was difficult enough when I was growing up, but today it's impossible because of the stupid gadgets that control our lives. I'm not kidding. You can't have everything. You can't be stuck on WhatsApp or the internet and the mobile phone and tomorrow, what are those things called? Virtual reality, and still be a good human being. You cannot. You cannot. It's a fallacy. It's a Silicon Valley lie. Because all they care about is selling you these gadgets. They don't worry about the devastation that is being caused to our communities. And why communities? Because our individual capacities of focus, attention, rigor, compassion, respect, all are being diluted. You can't have it both ways. So I was warning someone before the sessions that I'm pessimistic. Trump is not the problem. He's just not the problem. He is like a boil that has come to the surface. That's all. These things happen. A healthy person can have a boil. And all boils are not necessarily bad per se. It could be an indicator that there are problems. Okay? But there are deeper problems our societies have. We know the number of pundits talking about the ravages of globalization and the losing of jobs. That's at an economic level. But there are social and cultural implications to that economic decision to globalize the marketplace. The gadgets, the technologies. India has profited tremendously from both globalization and technology. And I can assure you, this is what is going to destroy democracy in India. I'm just going to stop. I get terribly carried away. We have 15 more minutes, so I'm happy to.
One model of autocratic society in America is the closed, fundamentalist religious society. Now, I'm a family mediator, and because of the internet, because of people recognizing that sexually they don't fit the standard pattern, there's a lot of turmoil because some younger people are recognizing that they're the misfit, that they don't fit, but the society, the family, the community that had been their entirety of their lives now rejects them. On one side, you have a community that feels they're speaking for God. And now you have somebody who says, I believe in freedom. Where are we in terms of mediating in an autocratic society when the authority comes from God?
Absolutely. So thank you for bringing me back to the topic at hand. I just want to say this. I just want to say this because I don't want you to walk out of here thinking he didn't talk at all about what we came to listen to. The whole issue of autocratic. Okay, feel free to ask me questions now or later. It is my understanding that the value system of mediation and dialogue are better suited for liberal, secular, democratic cultures. We can tweak these, compromise on these in order to get clients in autocratic society. Singapore is right now going whole hog on mediation, commercial mediation. They will not allow mediation in the social sphere because it's an autocratic society. But they recognize the importance of solving commercial and trade disputes amicably. So they will take mediation, strip it of most of its values, treat it like a technique and a technology, and they will scale it up.
And that's called self-determination.
Yes. By all means do it. But if here's a problem. If you are like me, and you have had the privilege of growing up in a democratic, liberal, secular society, and you value the kind of life you've had, and you want that life for your children, it might behoove you to ask yourself if or what the consequences are of stripping mediation of the core values that gave rise to it. Are there consequences to your own society if that happens? Because if you look at what's happening in the US or Western Europe, we have been complacent about these values. We have transferred some of them into political rights that we have agitated for. But the values themselves, we don't seem to take them very seriously. And we should not be surprised at the rise of Marine Le Pen in France, or the fact that the most popular politician in Netherlands right now is a right-wing xenophobe, or what's happening in this country. There is a cost to losing not just your personal character, but your society's character. You cannot have institutions which have been stripped away of its values. Doesn't have to be God, but the social contract that gave rise to a certain kind of a environment in countries like this, that contract seems to have frayed, and that's why we are struggling. Countries like India, we never had that social contract. You know why we are democratic? The 0.001% of the leadership at the time of independence studied in Oxford and Cambridge, not Massachusetts, the original one, okay? And imported, because they were Fabian socialists, they imported the values of Western democracies and transplanted it in India. This happened throughout the developing world, the newly independent countries of after World War II. And they were visionaries. What they didn't realize was you can't have a vision that is so transformative at the top, but nothing else under. Because down below, just a hair's width below, we were utterly and completely feudalistic and traditional and hierarchical, and we wanted inequality. Even today, I know people, I won't mention names, who come out of Harvard Law and Harvard Business School, Indians, who when they go back to India, they become casteist. It's not your education that does it. It's your value system. Harvard Business School doesn't give a damn about values. It teaches you how to be a really, really effective business person. Yes, sir.
Could you give some examples about the social contract that's gotten frayed that you refer to?
So again, I have to confess, I'm generalizing. I'm generalizing because at no point was this completely universal, even in these countries. By these countries, I mean North America and Western Europe. It didn't exist in Eastern Europe at all. But one of the social contract is, for instance, that we will tolerate differences and negotiate through them. I have attended in the 90s and early 2000s town hall meetings. The one that I attended and I facilitated on gay marriage was absolute havoc. But I've attended others where it was noisy, people were really passionate, but there was an attempt to try and work through differences. That is frayed now. That is frayed. I'm just giving you one example. Sorry, you want to say something?
Just to add to that, the fact that there are political representatives now who can get away with not having town hall meetings. Thank you. I was just adding that there are political representatives now who can get away with not having, convening, or attending town hall meetings in their district because of the economic and other influence that has affected the social contract.
That's one. The other thing is the assumption of the public good. Now, I'll give you an instance. Countries like India, the idea of public good doesn't exist. I'll tell you why. You walk, how many of you have gone to India? Okay. The streets are dirty. Nobody thinks twice about littering. A social contract is don't litter, because it's not just your space, it's common space. It's a very subtle one, but it's there. American cities, for someone like me, are so clean, And that's a public contract that exists. Thankfully, that hasn't been frayed yet. But like this, there are hundreds of little contracts that people, okay, one, standing in line. Such a simple thing. Stopping at a red light. Oh my God, if you've never driven in India, you don't know how to drive. Nobody gives a damn who else is on the road. The honking in India. You use the horn more than the accelerator because it's so crowded you can't accelerate. Okay? But the point I'm making is, when I say social contract, it's made up of many, many small agreements, most of which are tacit. And once they start breaking down, you are unable to even agree on the simplest things. And America, okay, I'm pessimistic at many levels, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not pessimistic about America. I'm not pessimistic about Western Europe. I'm nervous. The reason why Metaculture is interested in working in Europe on the immigrant issue and in the US and the multiple issues here is because I think this is the last bastion of liberal democracies. And if we allow this to not just fray but collapse, the world is going to step back into the 19th century. I'm a student in the sense I love history. And I'll stop with this. Anyone who is aware and conscious of the ways in which humans have developed, human societies have developed, we know that what we have experienced for the past 70 years is an absolutely small blip in human evolution. It took many astonishing things to come together for us to even recognize that we could sit, a group that's as diverse as this, and take each other fairly seriously. In many parts of the world, this cannot happen. Some of them are even called democracies because they hold elections. So I'm positive, not optimistic. I'm positive about the West because you have some kind of a history, however frayed, however tenuous. You have some mooring in humanistic, liberal, secular, democratic thinking. If you don't do what's necessary now, history will take care of you. And we don't want that to happen. Yes.
One of the major weapons, I think, in the last election is the characterization of the negativity around political correctness. And the question of how do you address that, or should you address it, but rather acknowledge the underlying issue on which political correctness is applied? Because it seems like you're talking about really delving, digging, if you will, and not even necessarily touch the issue. Maybe it's even in your dialogues you're saying this is not a, it's not doesn't serve anything.
Sorry, what doesn't serve anything?
Discussing things on a level of political correctness.
That doesn't serve anything.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So on a political level, would it be much more effective to ignore the attack on political correctness and go right for the issue and whatever, debate?
I think that's a good idea, but it's not easy to do. in the public space, public discourse, one of the problems with doing away with political correctness is that the demons have the license to come out. And I have an advantage in my groups. I can facilitate it. But in the public arena, who is there to facilitate it? This requires another kind of skill for those, the custodians of those public spaces, the media, the political leaders, the academic administrators, the professors. How do you actually ensure that these people have the skills and tools not to run away and shut down speech? I'm a big proponent of freedom of expression, free speech, not just for the press, for each one of us. And that means that the ugly speech will also come through. But we need to be able to manage it. It's clear that the last 30, 40 years of suppressing offensive speech has not worked. There's a blowback that can be destructive. We have to find another way of doing it. Did you have your hand up? No. Okay.
So are we training the bartenders in mediation facilitation? No,
they would make fantastic mediators.
But I'm thinking of what just happened in the Midwest.
Yes.
Had the bartender or somebody in that room, had skills, somehow maybe it could have made a difference.
Okay, so thank you. I'm glad you said this, and as I said, I'm unemployed. I can stand here for as long as I want. You guys have day jobs you have to go for. So, but, or at least I'm a tourist, so I have flexibility. So here's the thing. One of the initiatives that I want to make a plug for is that a group of mediators, starting with Mediators Beyond Borders, have started an initiative called Citizen Mediators. If anybody is interested in it, please take my card. I'll send you the material. It's an attempt to get the mediation conflict resolution community. Brad here knows about this. It's to get this community to come together across organizations, institutions across the world to start investing in the public space in their role as citizens. Coming back to the bartender, one of the biggest problems with democracy is we haven't invested in citizenship. We've invested in the judiciary, in the legislature, in the election process. Oh my God, the amount of investment in the election process. We should have a phenomenal democracy, except for gerrymandering and campaign finance, but we should have it. It will not happen. It will not happen because the average person, your bartender or Joe the plumber, doesn't know what the hell is demanded of him or her as a citizen. This is the problem with democracies. And mediators is an attempt to get mediators to start functioning as democratic citizens or citizens of a democracy at the most profoundest levels. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, before we do, I hate to interrupt. It is 10. Ashok said he could stay, but I think we have to formally wrap up now. If you had some specific things you wanted to talk to Ashok about, that'd be great. Ashok, I just want a personal observation. You said you didn't want to be liked. I think you're failing miserably. Thank you all for coming. Come next, thank you, Ashok. The first Thursday in April will be a presentation by Elizabeth Clements on her work in an organization she formed called Hidden Water about using restorative justice practices for victims and families of child abuse. So thank you all very much. Ashok is here, can talk a little longer. We'll see you next month. Thank you.